Namaste. This is the fourth podcast in the Origin of the Bell series, where I'll be reading out the origin of the bell in English, as translated by the Aaiyyanist Foundation and its various members, including me, who proofread it a bit. What else is there to say? This particular chapter, which is entitled The Birth, I will split into maybe 3 podcasts because this chapter is particularly long. So I don't want to give too much. Have an hour and a half long podcast or however long it takes to read this. I'm not sure yet. So I shall just begin, I guess. So this is the chapter called The Birth, part 4. Chapter 4 of the Origin of the Bell, which you can download for free from the Aaiyyanist Foundation, or you can buy a sort of hardback copy from Amazon. And if you're a member, obviously, you can get that as well. And also, you can get, if you're a Patreon, you can also get the ebooks of this and others as well. So, which is quite good. So support the Patreon and join the Aaiyyanist Foundation, and I'll just stop waffling and just begin. Okay. So this is The Birth. I'll start reading now. This story starts with a birth. 50,000 years ago, a child, Davidson, was born to a very poor family near a village called Dhireshan, which some scholars say was near the modern village of Suleiman. So Dhireshan is the village, the ancient village where Davidson was born. They lived by the riverbank and fished for food and collected berries to eat. So that's the family, that is, of course. The family was so poor that the only place they could stay in the village was a Talamali point. So obviously Tantric Aaiyanists know about this, but it actually explains it in the text as well. So these are total points of negativity, cursed places, where various talas, negative dimensions, are very close to our realm, and may in some cases intersect. So these are negative spaces. Obviously in this translation it says cursed places, which is, as I said, is can be construed as being a bit sectarian, but it's a place of negativity, which you also have in this current age as well. So some Aaiyanists are tasked with finding these places and sort of dispelling negativity, or going to these places and building tantric shrines there, for example. So anyway, so people who exist in these domains then and now suffer terrible ill fate and disease. Yes, that's if you're not attuned to the tantric path, that happens to you. But if you're following tantric, these places are something to sort of aspire to go to. Anyway, I'll continue reading. As such, no one would live there by choice unless they were a tantric adept. Davidson's family were not tantric masters, but were landless, such that they had no other choice but to live there, as all the land was taken in the village of Dhireshan. Remember that this was a tantric domain, and as such people were trained not to lend each other aid readily, though some tantric Aaiyanists did. In the ancient times, because they were much more attuned to the tantric, to other talas and lokas, people would not actively live in a Talamali point. And so, but obviously now, in this modern era, people are less attuned, but they do want to enter the tantric domain, they would live there by choice. So you have to think about when this story was written and how far back in the past it was, that humans who were much more spiritually attuned would be more likely not to live in a Talamali point, because there'd be no point, because they can traverse dimensions and lokas as by will, basically. So, but now that's because of the blocks sort of happen. That's sort of more difficult to do if you're a tantric adept and you want to go to those places, of course. Anyway, I'll continue reading. Next paragraph is this. Okay, yeah, as usual, I lost my place as I sort of waffle on about the text. I lose track of where I am. So the next paragraph is here. So Delvinian's mother unfortunately died at childbirth, and his father was killed soon after by wild animals. Some Aaiyyanist scholars and schools also believe that Delvinian's parents were both killed by wild animals when he was a toddler. So there's different schools have different not interpretations, different customs or traditions of how this story is. So some people say that he was a baby, and others say he was a toddler. And both parents were killed by animals as a part of a sort of one of the higher gods did that in order for this tale to play out. There's another side of the story which isn't presented in the origin of the Vel, but if you read around the subject in other texts which touch upon the Vel, you have different histories, I would say. Anyway, suffice it to say, most schools of Aaiyyanist thought agree that Delvinian was orphaned at an early age, and he was orphaned at an age such that he couldn't take care of himself. So he wasn't like 10 or something. He was like a baby or a toddler. So continue reading the next paragraph. Delvinian had no siblings or family and was utterly alone. It is at this point that the divine and material cross paths, and the higher conscious beings direct their gaze into our realm and begin to see it all in us. Thus it was that the universal Om interjected and nudged up a higher being, the goddess Parvati, into the affairs of humanity. So this is a continual tradition in Hinduism, actually maybe other religions as well, I'm not sure, that if something terrible is happening in Earth, the higher beings will intervene to sort of rectify it, to create more balance, and for various other purposes as well. So thus it was that the universal Om, Brahman, interjected and nudged a higher being, the goddess Parvati, which is obviously part of Brahman, closer to his oneness, into the affairs of humanity. As Parvati was meditating on the Tivinain, so this is the mystical yogic technique, the Tivinain, as they say. It's a yogic technique to still oneself and allow the inner mind to listen to the voice and sounds of Brahman. So obviously many Aaiyanists perform this now, but obviously Parvati is such a higher being that she is very attuned to the Tivinain sort of yogic technique, and she was directed by the universal Om, Brahman that is, to stop and focus her vision on the present and future. Thus the goddess Parvati looked down upon this realm and saw the young Delvinian lying by the river. The goddess perceived rightly that this child's journey should not end with him dying of hunger, wet, dirty, forgotten, and alone in the mud of the riverbank. So, yes, the Tivinain yoga technique is quite an interesting one. I don't know if maybe in a later podcast I could explain it. It might be quite useful for English-speaking Aaiyanists to sort of engage in. It's basically to still yourself and allow yourself to be one with everything. You find the inner mind, so to speak, and listen to the sounds of the universe. Sounds a bit corny, but that's what the yogic technique's about. It's about stilling oneself. A lot of yogic techniques obviously do that as well, but this is more of a direct approach from the Aaiyyanist tradition. So it involves lokas, tala, inscriptions, and yantras, and chanting mantras as well as meditation, which some meditative techniques you're silent, but this is a sort of holistic sort of effect. So that was what Parvati was doing, the Tivinain, when she sort of realized that Davidson was by the river and saw the past and the future and the present and everything. And anyway, so this is the next paragraph. Some people argue that there are countless babies and children who die every day throughout these ages and throughout the world. Why was this child special that he had to be saved? The answer many Aaiyanists give is that this child was not special, he was ordinary. So this is quite important in this tale. It's not like a tale of superhumans, or obviously there are superhuman characters in the story, but the central character is just normal, and it's supposed to be like that. He's supposed to be us, really. And that's what this. If you don't believe in the actual history, or I believe in the history, but if you don't believe in that, you can still take away that that the story is about, but it's about you really. He's not superhuman and was not enlightened. He was not a descendant of a god nor a reincarnation of one. In this sense, Delvinian represents us as we are. If we make the wise decision, sorry, my tongue tightness again. If we make the wise decisions and seek enlightenment, it will find us. So this tale is essentially saying that anyone can achieve greatness, really. So let's read that again, actually. So the child was not special. He was not superhuman nor enlightened. He was not a descendant of a god nor a reincarnation of one. So he wasn't like a son of Shiva or something like that, or reincarnation of Shiva, or anything like that. Yeah. So he represents us as we are. And so Goddess Parvati perceived the baby Delvinian on the riverbank, alone and helpless, and thus she designed a method to save him. Parvati sent a dream to sage Kal Shivayan, the head teacher and sage of the temple school of Kutikampalam. So that's Kal Shivayan, the sage, very famous sage, tantric sage, the head teacher and sage of the temple school of Kutikampalam, a Kalayan tantric temple that housed many students. As many Dravidian scholars know, the ancient temple school of Kutikampalam was housed and linked directly with the main Kalayan palace of Kottayam, where the great queen Siwanimaniya resided. So there's a lot of words there to take in on board. So there's the sage himself, the head teacher of the school, and that school is a very famous Kutikampalam Kalayan tantric temple, and the sage Kal Shivayan was the sort of the headmaster, the head teacher, the head of the temple, the hierarchy, the sort of the pinnacle point. And it was housed inside the main Kalayan palace. So basically, you can imagine that the palace was there, inside is the temple, and that's where the great tantric queen Siwanimaniya resided. So it's like a shell within a shell. And obviously, when you read the story, Murugan will be placed into the shell as well as a third layer. But that's going to be happening later. So I don't know how long I've read this for. So I was going to read 5 paragraphs at a time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Actually, I've read 6, but so I will stop there. I'll continue reading about sage Kal Shivayan and the Tantric Aaiyyanist in the next podcast. But that's sort of more than enough to get on with for the moment. So I hope you like that this short podcast. Obviously, read The Origin of the Bell yourself and listen to the podcast as well, because I'm not just reading it. I'm talking around it as well from my own perspective. So if you see a what's it called again? If you know any tantric Aaiyanists, talk to them about it separately from me. You'll get another perspective on the story. Obviously, the text here is the Ironwell Foundation sort of text, and I had some input with it. Some other people did. There are some words which I sort of disagree with, like for example, cursed, to describe a negative place. That's just basically it's all relative, really. If you're a tantric adept or you're following different paths of Aayanism, then saying something that has a bad connotation to it in English is not great. But we'll see how this draft goes, and how Aayanists take it, and how Dravidian Aayani speakers who could also speak English, how they how they react to it. We have been getting feedback from Dravidian Aayani speakers who are saying, "Oh, change this word, do this, change that." So we're going to take that all on board, and maybe do a second draft with the language a bit more, I don't know, not neutral, but less, how can I put it, less Atmani. Sorry, I don't want to sound sectarian in that sense, but yeah, that's basically where I'm coming from. If you like these talks and you like the work we're doing, support us on the Patreon site, and that really helps us. What else helps us? Joining us as well. Email info@iron.org. That's good as well. What else can you do? You can, if you email, I'll answer the emails as well. But we've got some volunteers coming soon. The order of me uploading these podcasts is not the order of how I'm recording them. So this podcast is like in April, for example, but it may be like in a month's time I'll upload it. I'm recording snippets here and there when I have time. So anyway, that's why you'll have all the context changes of me. I'm having the same shirt on for some of them, and having some different clothes for another, and it's maybe a bit jarring. But hopefully I won't do it in the same podcast. I'll keep the same clothes on for the one reading, but you get the idea. Anyway, so hope you enjoyed the podcast. Speak to you soon, and I'll press the button to log off. And do subscribe, become a Patreon. I might have a thing where I read out the Patreon names. That's quite nice. Anyway, we'll see how it goes. Okay, speak to you soon. Bye.